Hello, everybody, and welcome into my latest live broadcast. Today it is Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2023. My name is Kerry Holzman, and thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today on another live and hopefully interactive video. Yes, interactive. It means you can talk to me in the chat room. We have a live chat room that will be available when you're watching the video live. If you're watching this video after it is aired live, sometimes it's a little confusing to people how to tell which way is which. When is it live? When am I watching a replay of a live recording? Generally speaking, one very easy way to tell is the date and the time. If, for example, you're watching this video on any day other than February 14th, 2023, you are watching a re-recording. Also, the chat room is available to all subscribers. You just have to be a subscriber for 1 minute to get into the chat. This dissuades the troublemakers, many of them, the bots and the harassers. So that's why that's in place, so that our chat room can be as civil as possible on a worldwide public forum such as this that invites all kinds in. But we certainly want to discourage people who aren't here for the same reason the rest of us are, which is to share information, enjoy each other's company. We're all like-minded individuals and all share a passion of computers or technology. So if you fit into that category, you are absolutely welcome into our chat room. If you're seeing a replay of the chat room with no option to participate, you are likely watching a replay or you are not subscribed to the channel. Subscribing to the channel doesn't cost you anything. As I mentioned, there are a very large, disproportionate number of fake users who are able to very easily create multiple YouTube accounts and use that for a harassment campaign or a spamming campaign. So this is a way to discourage that. Well, it's not an absolute solution. It absolutely does make a massive impact on just making it a little more difficult for those people out there in the world with nothing else better to do. So, we'll give them something else to do. In the meantime, if you've not joined our chat before, I hope you will. I hope you will pop in and say hello. It is a very friendly chat room. Anybody who isn't friendly isn't going to be here very long. So if you're shy, if you don't normally engage with others socially, this is all online. It's a lot easier than being in person. And everybody here is friendly. So if you haven't before, I hope you will pop in and say hello. That's all you have to do. Just type hello and you will get an hello back. And you know what? And if that's all you do, that's great. But if you did that every time, if you joined my videos regularly, you'll start recognizing familiar names. And the hello becomes, how have you been? And before you know it, you start developing these online friendships with people. And it's just an amazing thing. The community here on this channel is far more valuable than any content that I make. So if you're not a part of it and you're just watching my content, you are missing out on where the pure gold is on this channel. And that's this community, which I would love to see continue to grow and flourish with more like-minded and kind, supportive individuals. And if that sounds like a place you'd like to be, we'd love to have you. It'll cost you nothing. So I hope you'll give it a shot. For the rest of you, the familiar names and faces, thanks so much for everybody joining me, and good to see those familiar names and faces back in the chat. Super shout out and thank you goes out to Jack Wilson, who contributed very generously before today's broadcast. Now, I understand that Jack is suffering a septic system backup, which is, I've never had a septic system, but I've heard about it, and I've heard how nasty it can be. And if it makes you feel any better, Jack, there is a YouTube channel that I strongly recommend. This gentleman's name is, now I'm gonna have to look it up. He does septic system installation. He runs his own septic company. And he does these videos that are very blunt, direct, shares customer stories, business stories, employee stories, septic system challenges, And his name is James. Let me look it up now. James. Is it? No, that's not him. I'm going to find it here for you because I strongly recommend this guy just for good business advice. Also, if you're wanting to learn more about when I was looking at purchasing a house in Michigan, most of them being out in those sticks away from the city, all around septic systems. And I just wasn't quite sure which information about septic systems was more accurate than other information. So when I found this guy, I really feel like he knows what he's talking about. And it comes across to me anyway as a very trusted source. And well, there may not be anything you're going to learn from him regarding septic systems. I think his perspective and his challenges are entertaining. And I want to find that before I start today's video. And I will find it here in just a second. I really like his business advice, his common sense approach to things. He also does a number of YouTube shorts. James Butler. His name is James Butler, and just an absolute pleasure to watch this guy. He's somebody who clearly has a passion and a pride in the quality of the work that he does. He's not cutting any corners. He talks about some of the frustrations he's had with some customers trying to get away with things, trying to pull a fast one on them, or saying one thing and then you get there and it's something else entirely. And from a business perspective, I relate to this guy. From a septic system perspective, I don't know anything about it other than what I've learned from looking at the homes in rural Michigan, as well as watching his channel. And it's just consistently very entertaining videos, I think. Educational and entertaining. James Butler is the name of the YouTube channel. So if you type into YouTube search James space Butler Septic, and it's sort of a guy's got quite a shaved head with a beard, typically has sunglasses on the top of his head if he's outside, and see if you enjoy his content. Maybe make you feel better about your situation, get your mind off of it, maybe. I don't know, just putting it out there. It's unusual for me to watch videos from plumbers, right? That's not my thing. I like tech videos, but this guy is just very, very engaging in how he presents the information, and very relatable to me as far as running a business is running a business. We all have the same challenges. So in any event, I hope you get that septic issue resolved sooner rather than later. Hopefully you've got somebody out there working on it now. And thank you again for your generosity, Jack. Sarge Tech said, I have a septic system. Also, what I know is do not put grease of any kind down the drain. Well, they're going to tell you that regardless. Yeah. So enough on that. I want to talk about these remote rebooters for routers and modems. It's something I've been meaning to talk about. I initially, back at TechCon 20, what year was that I went to TechCon in Grand Rapids, Michigan? 2018, 2019, 2020? I can't remember anymore. But they have a company there that was promoting some of the products they sell, one of which was a remote reboot for a modem and or a router. And the way it works is it's a device that you plug into the wall, and you plug your modem and ideally your router into this device. And you either plug it into your network or it connects Wi-Fi to your network, and you have a web interface you log into, just a local web interface that it has like 4 or 5 websites. It reaches out in pings like every whatever interval you want it to reach out and say, ping google.com, ping yahoo.com, ping cnn.com, or ping fox.com. Ping a website that is always up. And so if your internet service goes down, if your modem locks up or your router locks up, then the ping will fail. And the reason it's pinging multiple websites is, maybe the website is down, right? So if it's pinging completely different websites and they're all coming back as failing, in other words, not getting a response from a ping. A ping is just, if you don't know, pinging something is like shouting, hey, and then you get a pong, a ping and a pong. And then the pong would be, hey, you'd get some kind of a response. It's not literally that, but that's the best way I could explain it in human language. We're just reaching out and saying, can you hear me? And it should come back and say yes, and then tell you how many milliseconds it took for you to get the response, and that can indicate if you have a routing issue with your internet connection or an issue at all with your internet connection, or if the site you're pinging may be down. So what this thing does is you put in a number of sites you want it to ping on a regular interval, and if all the sites are coming back with no response, it assumes your modem or router needs to be rebooted, and it automatically cuts power to whatever plugged into it, which should be your modem and your router, and then waits about 20 seconds, fires everything back up again, and then it waits a couple minutes for things to reinitialize, and it'll reach out and try and ping those websites. Now, if it does not get a response, like let's say, for example, your internet service provider is down. Well, there's nothing that a reboot's going to do to fix the issue. However, it will, depending on the interval you set, reboot the modem and router again after a certain period of time, and repetitively do this until the sites come back with responses from pings. Now, this is really, really useful if, well, I'll give you an example. Our good friend Mitch Morrison was traveling, and he had an issue where his modem would need to be rebooted. Or not his modem, his router. And he wasn't quite sure what was going on. It was intermittent. He couldn't make it happen. I remember once he was going out to Colorado to visit with family. And sorry, I got a little mess here behind me. And no sooner than he left, a few hours later, he wasn't even out of the state of Arizona on this little road trip, his router seized up and he was no longer able to access his media back home. So he'll listen to music and things while he's on the road from his own library using something like Plex, for example. So what he has to do is he's got to call a neighbor that he trusts who has access to his place to go in there and unplug the modem and router and plug it back in for him. And the neighbor's elderly, not easier for them to get down on their knees and do this, and he's really feeling bad about it. So we put one of these devices in there so the next time he would go on a trip that it would sense this has happened and reboot. But he doesn't go on trips that often, a couple times a year, and so it had been a while. And I had an extra router laying around, and I said, it sounds to me like your router's dying. It doesn't sound like it's a modem issue. Based on all the other information he was telling me is, this diagnosis went on for over a year. And I just said, let's just put this different router in there and try it. And that's resolved the problem ever since. So in most cases, well, I won't say in most cases, in some cases, well, an unplug of the modem or router and plugging it back in can resolve it. It doesn't necessarily fix what's wrong. So I have another client, for example, whose internet was routinely going down at their office about once every 2 months. And they'd come in on Monday and their internet wouldn't work. They'd call for support. I'd have them unplug the modem and router, plug it back in, and the internet would be up and running again. And after we did this about 6 times over the course of a year or a year and a half, they stopped calling me because they knew what to do. So I was discussing with them the option of putting one of these remote rebooters in so they don't have to do it. And they told me 2 things. One, it's not happening very often anymore, maybe twice a year now. And 2, now that they know what to do, it's really not a big deal to unplug it and plug it back in. Where it gets to be a problem is if you're traveling, if you're away, and there's nobody there that can unplug and plug back in the equipment. And so that's where these remote reboot tools come into play. Now, I've got some websites up for the products I've randomly selected that I thought were interesting so that we can kind of dive a little deeper into these so you can determine if that's something that would benefit you. So they're ranging in price from cheapest to most expensive. And there's everything from just a dumb device that reboots whatever plugged into it every 24 hours, whether you like it or not. And those things are like 10 bucks. And that's where we'll start, is we'll start with the cheap ones and explain why they're so inexpensive. I just need to find, my Amazon page. Okay, here it is. Now, everything I'm about to show you, all the links are in the order in which I'm showing you these devices in the video description below this video. So first of all, let me bring up this Amazon page so you can see it. That should work. Here we go. All right. Now this one's a little baffling to me. This is a router rebooter, as it's advertised. It's going to automatically reboot whatever is plugged into it every 24 hours. That means if you plug it in at 1:30 in the afternoon, it's going to reboot at 1:30 in the afternoon every day. So from the moment you plug it in, that's when the timer starts. There's no adjustment. There's nothing for you to set. So that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's meant to plug directly into the back of your router or modem, which means you've got to get the right end on the cable. They don't sell it with replacement ends, so you've got to make sure you order the right one because it's factory molded with that connector. So that makes things a little complicated, but it's, it's a $12, it's under $12 for something like this. Now, at the very end of the listing of product, there is a simple, regular, good old-fashioned everyday plug-in timer, which is essentially the same price. And this would also be something that would be a hard power off and power on a regular interval. But for the same price, you could program this to only do it once a week or multiple times a day. We've all worked with, I'm sure we've all had those timers that you plug a lamp in and it'll turn the lights on when say you're traveling and you don't want people to know you're not home. So you have the lights come on automatically. We've had these since the 70s. And now they're cheaper than ever. They're programmable and digital, and whatever you plug into them is what's going to turn on or turn off. And this was something that was brought to my attention by a viewer when I was initially thinking about making this video during a members only video. And one of the members said, well, why not just use a regular old everyday outlet timer? And I thought, well, that's way easier than, for example, buying one of these, and well, that's not the right one, buying one of these where you've got to make sure you get the right end. You're essentially at the same price point. So I go to the next tab over. Now this is called the ConnectSense router rebooter. Now this one is going to monitor the internet, and it will reboot as described when the websites you're having it ping come back with no response. So it's a bit more intelligent than simply cycling the power on and off on any interval, though you can program it to do that in addition to or alternatively. But you'll see the prices start going up now. $55, a little under $55 for this. And once again, it's whatever you're going to plug into it, that's what it's going to control. So with a plug like that, you're pretty much only going to plug in a modem or a router because you only have the one plug to deal with. Let's move over to the next one. Now this one, right around the same price. This one's a little bit cheaper. It's right under $50. And this will connect to your Wi-Fi. And it will monitor websites. There is no app you need to install, although you can put your phone number in it and it can send you text messages to let you know when an event occurs if you want it to do that. And it's going to monitor your connection via Wi-Fi, I believe only via Wi-Fi on this unit. And again, you have one plug. So if you have a modem and a router, this is not ideal unless it's just one or the other you need to reboot. Generally speaking, you want to reboot both. Anytime you reboot a modem or a router, you should reboot the other thing. So if you feel like you need to reboot your modem, reboot the modem and router. If you're one of those folks that has a modem router a combination unit, then of course one plug is all you're going to need. Over here, this is the Easy Outlet 5. So we're at an $80 price point, again with one plug. And this does have an app where you can access it with iOS or Android, as well as through the cloud with a web-based control that you can log into. Obviously, if your internet is down, you can't log into it to control it. So, bear that in mind. And this is both, I believe this is wired and wireless. It says it supports up to 10 amps. That means you could, in theory, plug it into a small surge protector with low drain devices such as a modem and router and have it just turn off the surge protector, right? However, this is the real IT tool here, the digital logger. Now this has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 individually switchable outlets on it where you can log in. You can connect via Wi-Fi. You can connect it with an Ethernet connection. You're, $228 for a device like this. And this is ideal in more of an IT scenario where you need to reboot different devices on a rack server, let's say. You can log in assuming the internet is up, but a server needs to be rebooted or a switch needs to be rebooted. As long as this is before the switch, that you can still log in and access it via the web. You can individually turn on or turn off each numbered outlet. That's why the outlets have numbers next to them. And that can be very handy if the alternative is getting in your car and driving to the customer's location just to flip a power switch. I know this would have come in handy for a server that I was having issues with a few years ago. The client refused to replace the server, and I had to instruct the employees how to turn the server off by holding the power button in for 10 seconds and then turning it back on. And the employees didn't like that. They wanted me to do it, but I didn't want to drive for a half an hour in the car to do that. Well, if I'd had something like this available, it would have paid for itself the very first time I needed it, quite frankly. And because you can plug in so many different devices, it enables you to control so much more than just your modem and your router. And especially when you're dealing with, in particular, IT infrastructure. It's very common in IT that devices need to be rebooted, whether it's a storage device like a NAS, whether it's a switch, whether it's a wireless access point. And being able to do that all from a keyboard, from the comfort of wherever I am at the time. I can even use my phone and control it via a telephone, so long as their internet is up. Now, it can also ping for you, and you can tell it, okay, my modem and router are on plugs 1 and 2, and if the ping doesn't resolve, then go ahead and reset outlets 1 and 2. So it would do that as well. So you can see you really get what you pay for here. Let me go back over to the chat room and see if there's any questions I can address regarding these. Has anybody ever used one of these, or are you currently using one? Lumdog says, I would probably reboot once a week just to keep the router fresh. Yeah, some people prefer to do that. It depends on the area you live in and how often you have to do that in reality. For me, both Studio A and Studio B very rarely need to be rebooted. I had to reboot Studio A because the internet got really, really slow. So this device would not have helped me in the auto sense detect, right? Because it would still ping and resolve. But until I unplugged the modem and the router, waited a minute and plugged them back in again, did I get my gigabit service. For whatever reason, something was a glitch. I don't know how long it was like that, but I noticed the internet was really, really slow over at Studio A. And now, of course, had I known it was slow and had I plugged in and configured a remote rebooter, I could log in remotely since the internet was still working and done that remotely. But I didn't even know it was slow until I went there and I was like, this isn't right, you know? First thing you do, reboot the modem and router. Whatever it is went away, and it's been fine ever since. So I wouldn't reboot every week, not me personally, but I certainly understand if somebody would. And if that's the case, just getting a regular old lamp timer, like I showed you, those digital timers are $11. That's all you need, and just schedule it to reboot it whatever day of the week at whatever time. And whatever you plug into it's going to have power cut and turn back on again as you program it. So you could program it, for example, to turn off the outlet at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday and turn the outlet on at 1:01 in the morning on a Sunday. That will give it a 1 minute off period for everything for the capacitors to drain, and you should wait a minute anyway. Or be on the safe side, wait 2 or 3 minutes if it's something where you're not going to be around, you'll be asleep, you're not using it. And it's a very, very inexpensive way to do that, just using 1970s technology. So you don't have to buy a router or rebooter if what you want is a regular intervaled, once a week on and off. On the other hand, if you want to monitor it, you want it to be able to send you messages and let you know, do know that these devices are available, and it might just solve a problem you have with yourself or with somebody's computer that you maintain. Super Edge says ASUS routers have this reboot feature available in their web GUI. So I do know that there are routers that do have schedulers. I don't think ASUS is alone in that. And the problem that I can foresee with that is that, like in my case, I didn't necessarily, I believe, have a router issue. I had a modem issue. So the ASUS router would be ideal to do a regular schedule of just the router itself without the modem being rebooted. And it's certainly something worth mentioning, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that may be all a particular viewer desires. So a good tip there, and I appreciate that. Generally, I think of the router schedulers as more for controlling internet access for particularly families that want kids to go to bed, or just, not have the distraction of being online after a certain time of night, or to control how much time they're spending online by enabling or disabling the Wi-Fi or the individual devices on a schedule. So I never really thought of using the scheduler as a way to reboot the router, but that perfectly makes sense. I have no doubt that's likely true. However, if your internet's down and it's down because of your modem, that isn't going to help you. But it is something that you might already have in your router, and it might be all you need, and certainly wouldn't cost you anything to experiment with that. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Lawn Dog said, it's great you were discussing the subject. You're giving us ideas to deal with these kind of problems. I kind of like the fancy option you are showing us with this product. Well, I agree. I mean, the most desirable product, I believe, is that $225 one. But it is a bit overkill, even for my clients. We don't have enough devices. I wouldn't use more than 4 of those plugs. They might make a smaller version of it for less money. I'm not sure. But the first thing is just to raise awareness to introduce you to these products. And if it's a problem that you or somebody you know or a client that you have that regularly has an issue with and it's driving you bonkers, one of these devices might just be all you need to resolve that. I see Mark Gaines joining us in the chat. Welcome in, Mark. And Robert Fontaine jumps in the chat, says hello. There's Glenn's Music, who wants to know, I wonder when we'll get to the point where all internet is permanently connected and never goes down. Well, it's like electricity. Initially, when electricity first became available, very few people had it. And it was kind of a treat if you went somewhere where somebody did have electricity. Now, you can't imagine going anywhere where they don't have electricity, right? But it's still we still suffer power outages from time to time, and depending on where you live, it might be a regular occurrence. For me, again, Studio A and Studio B, very rarely do we have a power outage. Maybe once a year, once every 2 years. But again, very much depends on your region. And of course, if you have a power outage, that's a bigger problem than a modem and a router or your internet going down. So I imagine it'll never be to a point where it's just always available all the time. There'll be some reason you need to reboot or reset, whatever that reason might be. But the technology does need refreshing from time to time. And you should be careful what you wish for. When you get too accustomed to something always being there, it can be very easy to forget how to live when for some reason it's not there anymore. So say it's been up 24/7 for 5, 6, 7 years, and then suddenly it goes down and it's down for some time. It can make living life quite miserable as we've forgotten how to live without it. So there is a downside. Richard Gulcher saying hello. There's our friend Rick Lakes and Oisting joining us all the way from Norway. Mats Olof watching us from Sweden says hello. Martin Wolfert says, hey everybody, this is a very timely topic for me. Do know that when you go to Amazon, you can do a search for these remote rebooters. There's far more than just this selection I've picked for you. I tried to run the gamut of cheap and simple to pricier and more granularly controllable. So depending on what your needs are, what your budget is, these devices can absolutely be a lifesaver. As I mentioned with Mitch Morrison, we did put a device in that connects to the Wi-Fi and will ping a site, but we never really had the opportunity to use it because once we replaced the router, this problem went away. And this was maddening. This was absolutely maddening because there was no consistency. You couldn't predict when this problem was going to happen other than Murphy's Law. When Mitch would travel, it would almost always happen when he traveled. His last trip when he went to, I think he went to Thailand with all the new equipment in place, he never had any disconnect or any connection issues at all throughout that whole trip. And he was gone, I want to say about a month. So that was a good test. And it just goes to show sometimes you might have a piece of equipment that's failing. And so by buying a device like this, all you're doing is perpetrating the problem rather than fixing it. If you do have a modem or a router that's failing, yes, I suppose using a device like this will keep it alive longer, such as in Mitch Morrison's case, as long as he would reboot it when these intermittent problems would happen. It was fine again for a while, but for how long, nobody could predict. So by replacing that router, first of all, you can get a router a good router for a little around $100. I think the one we put in Mitch's place was $170. And that router's got a stronger signal. He no longer needs a Wi-Fi extender. The signal is strong enough without it now. And the router's much faster. It can handle much more bandwidth as we add more and more Wi-Fi devices. I don't know if he's still got the router rebooter hardware plugged in. I haven't asked him, but it certainly seems it's been well over a year, and as far as I know, he's never needed it. So it seems like it's completely unnecessary for him to have now. But I'd have to ask him. I'm just assuming based on the last time we've talked about it. I assume if it's not being talked about, there's a reason it's not on his mind, right? But again, I'm making assumptions here. When you add a device like that to your network and you don't need it, it then becomes a point of potential failure where the device itself can cause your machines to reboot if the electronics in it get flaky. Just like anything else, it's designed to help you, but over time, like anything else, it can suffer the same kind of failures everything else does. And it itself may need to be rebooted from time to time to refresh its own internet connection, and it doesn't reboot itself. So bear in mind that sometimes when we add items into our IT infrastructure that are designed to protect us from failure, those devices in and of themselves become a future point of potential failure, such as a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply. Those batteries, those are lead acid batteries like what a car uses. And they like to be charged at all times. They dissipate rather quickly, and their lifespan is right around 3-4 years. A lot of people have UPSs that are older than that, and they falsely believe their UPS still works. The best way you can test to see if your UPS battery is still holding a charge isn't by looking at the lights on the UPS. It's by, with your equipment turned on, and hopefully you've got everything saved and all your applications closed, unplug the UPS from the wall to simulate a power outage so it kicks on to the battery, and see if what you've got plugged into it stays on, and time it for how long. If your UPS is older than 3 years old, there's a good chance that it'll stay on under 1 minute. It may only stay on for a few seconds, or it may not stay on at all. So you might have sort of a false sense of security that your UPS is protecting you, when in fact in a power outage situation that you've purchased it for, because you have neglected to replace the battery after 3 years, you might just find there is no charge left on that battery. So it might work as a surge protector. It's big and it's heavy. The battery could be leaking. That's never good. And sometimes when the batteries start to fail, they can cause power interruptions where a client will call me and say, hey, my computer just rebooted for no apparent reason. So whenever we install a UPS, I get my label maker out and I put the month and the year. I don't need the exact day. And I know that if the month and the year have gone over 3 years, we need to either replace the battery in the UPS or replace the UPS. And quite frankly, it's often cheaper and faster to simply replace the UPS. The UPSs are getting smaller. They're getting more powerful. They're less expensive. The old ones, again, as things aged, it's possible you go through the process of replacing the battery and find there's still a problem with the UPS, which leads you to buying a new one anyway. So these are temporary. UPSs are temporary. They need to be replaced about every 3 years. Some people can get lucky and get 4 or 5 years out of them. It really just kind of depends. Overall, 3 years is about the average lifespan. And if you've got a UPS over 3 years old, you should test it, unplug it from the wall with something plugged into it, and see how long, if at all, the thing plugged into it stays on. Because with a new UPS, you should get, let's say you've got a computer plugged in there, that computer should be on at least 10 minutes. That's a good long time. So when these UPSs go out, they can cause problems. Ironically, the very problems you put them in to avoid, which is losing power without warning, they can cause that. Or they can sit quietly not working, leaving you with this placebo effect that you think you're being protected. But then when you actually lose power, you'll find out too little too late when you've lost all the work you were working on since the last time you saved it. So it's best to run a fire drill from time to time and check these things. Now, you're not supposed to just toss these batteries in the trash. They don't want these in the landfill. You should take it to a recycling center, and you can Google in your area for who will accept these batteries. It's no charge for that. If you've got hundreds of batteries, there are services that will come out to you and pick them up free of charge, but they're not going to do it for a handful of them. So I recently upgraded about a dozen UPSs, and I had a dozen of these little batteries, and they're heavy. These are lead acid batteries. And we have a place here in Phoenix, or in the Phoenix metropolitan area, called Batteries Unlimited, and they take all batteries for recycling. And that was a good way to get rid of the old batteries, replace them in the UPSs, pulled off the old label, put on a new label with the month and the year. And once again, once we are made aware of the fact that we're at or beyond the 3-year point, we revisit whether or not to change the batteries again or to simply replace the UPS. Another downside of replacing the batteries is If you're going to Amazon and you're buying some of the cheapest batteries you can find, which is what most consumers do, they may not be of the same quality of what the UPS came with from the original manufacturer. So you may only get 1 year of life out of them, maybe even less. And of course, anytime you have batteries, you have a potential fire hazard. So when you're buying these cheapest batteries you can get, the likelihood of that being the source of a future fire is much higher than with name brand batteries that are going to cost you more. So decide accordingly, but do know that there are potential consequences when we're dealing with this stuff at this level, and then we're trying to, scrape the bottom of the barrel to save money, and we end up with an inferior product that doesn't have as long of a life, and it's the same amount of labor to replace the battery. You just might have to do it 2 or 3 times as often, but maybe it only costs you half as much. When it's all said and done, it might cost you a lot more. So I strongly recommend my customers always replace the UPSs rather than replace the batteries. And if we are going to replace the batteries, we want to use the manufacturer's battery. And yes, it costs a lot of money. And that's why when you look at the cost, it often just makes more sense to buy a new UPS and not deal with it. William99 said, my UPS has software that does a self-test. Well, you can choose to believe software if you want to. I've been working with computers since the 1980s, just about 1980 exactly. And I can tell you, I don't trust them. One thing I have learned about technology is not to rely on it too much and not to believe it too much. I take everything the technology says with a grain of salt. I am not a fan of automation. If I do automate things, I have to audit them regularly because things will stop working and you least expect it, and it may not be drawn to your attention if you don't go looking for it. So yes, if you choose to believe the software, that's your choice. If it were me, I would verify with some regular interval, once a year, once every 6 months, at least once a year. I would want to pull the plug from the wall just to verify the accuracy of the software. And over time, perhaps I would get to trust it. But there's probably going to be a time where the battery, the software says, hey, the battery's at 100%. And then you unplug it and the battery drops to 0% in 2 seconds. That's the problem, right? Software we're not at a point of artificial intelligence yet that it can accurately assess the load-bearing capability of the battery, only its voltage. So again, that's for you to decide on your own, and that's just the way I am. I would never, ever solely trust any piece of software or any automation without some form of regular auditing to verify it. You need human verification, in this case, at least once a year. If I'm automating backups, those backups have to be audited regularly because it's entirely possible the backup's not running and nobody's paying any attention. And I've seen that so many times in my career. I certainly won't have it happen under my watch. I'll let other people do that. But for me, if I'm maintaining a client's backups, those backups are audited weekly, every week. So yeah, the battery testers in general are just not reliable for testing any battery under any circumstance. The problem with batteries, and the same with computer power supplies, is it's not enough to look at the voltage. There's many times I've gotten into a car in my life where the battery was too weak to start the car, but the radio came on, the headlights come on, the dome lights come on. You put a voltmeter on it, it says it's 12 volts. I've taken a dying battery to the automotive store and had them test it for me, saying, hey, this is a bad battery, it's under warranty, it'll be prorated, I need a new battery. And they go, no, this battery tests fine. I'm like, all right, let's go put it back in the car. We go put it back in the car won't turn over. I say, so does that battery seem fine to you? I've learned not to argue with people anymore. As much as possible, I will humor whatever it is if they're disagreeing and say, well, show me. And if they're right, I've learned something new. And if I'm right, the argument is over. And it's just far less exhausting. So yes, you can get a volt tester and you can test volts all day long. But that doesn't tell you how much of a load the power supply or the battery can actually absorb or put out. And that's very common, at least for me in my life, a very common way car batteries die. Is it seems like it works until you go to start the car. And you can throw a tester on it and the tester says it's fine. Now, automotive stores should have a tester that puts a load onto the battery, but they don't always know what they're doing. They don't, sometimes they just look at the voltage and then want to argue or debate that the battery's fine. And so I'll just say, again, let's go put it back in the car. Come with me. I want to show you that I'm using the same battery, no tricks up my sleeve, and let's put it back in. And you tell me why my car's not starting. If it's not the battery, what is it? So batteries can be tricky in that way. And that's why a full functioning test, such as the UPS being unplugged from the wall, is really the only way you can know with absolute certainty beyond software, beyond a tester, actually simulating, creating the event that it's designed to do, and then measuring how long it lasts. Because I guarantee you, it won't last as long in year 2 as it lasted in year 1. And year 3, it won't last as long as it did in years 1 or 2. The battery's life slowly degrades until eventually it's got seconds or nothing, where it just completely drains itself in seconds. Don't take my word for it. Test it yourself. Jared says, I do all my backups manually. That way I know it's done. I've been burnt before, relying on automation and not checking. Lesson learned. Well, but that's a downside too. I've been guilty of myself forgetting to do the backup. So I think a combination of automating the backup as well as auditing the backup is the best solution. And that works best for me. So all my clients that I do backups for have scheduled backups that run automatically. And the time, the day, and the interval depends on what the client's paying for. My preference is for me to go in there and do it by hand. However, sometimes I forget. Sometimes I get distracted. Sometimes I'm not available to do the backup for one circumstance or another. Maybe I'm on vacation. Maybe I don't have internet access. So that backup will run on a schedule automatically in that circumstance. There has been times where I realize, oh my gosh, I was supposed to do the backup yesterday. And then I'll wait till the end of the business day when the customers, when the clients aren't in the office, because I don't want to interrupt them. And I'll log in remotely and I'll see that the backup did in fact run automatically. When the automated backup runs, it won't delete any files. I have to give it permission. But any files that have been changed or any files that have been altered do get synchronized to the backup. Any files that have been deleted, I have to have what we call, the backup needs to be in attended mode so that it can show me a summary of what's scheduled to be deleted. And that can alert me if somebody may have accidentally deleted something. So if I notice 50% of the data is getting erased, I'm not going to permit that without talking to the customer first. But at least I have peace of mind that if I forget to do the backup or I'm unable to do the backup, that the backup will run on a schedule automatically, but it won't delete any files without my permission. And that seems to be the best balance for me and my business for my customers. Jeff H says, hello. Hey, welcome in, Jeff. So, and once again, yeah, so I see other people talking about self-tests and things of that nature. If you choose to believe those self-tests, I mean, that's your choice. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. Me personally, being involved in technology for 3/4 of my life, I know not to trust it. And the minute you stop checking, well, you'll find out too late. You know, it's just happened to me too many times. It happens to my customers all the time, where they thought something was happening and it was for a while, and then it stopped and the customer just quit checking. And, you know, by the time I get called in, it's probably not been working for some time. I've seen UPSs that customers have had for 10 years. They probably haven't been working for 7 or 8 years. And they see the green light is on. They see that the UPS isn't complaining. They even have sometimes a piece of software that runs and says the status of the UPS and shows the status is good, when in fact it isn't. So, but that's up to you. But at least I'm giving you the information, and what you choose to do with it's entirely up to you. I do this for a living. My business has liabilities. I'm paid. And because I'm paid, there's a certain sense of accountability and responsibility that's expected when customers paying you for a job. So if that customer needs a backup and the backup's not there, if that customer has a power outage in the middle of a workday and they're expecting their machines to stay up long enough for their employees to save their files, and that doesn't happen, there are, and I guarantee there will be, negative consequences to my company. There will be financial repercussions, and those financial repercussions may include losing the customer, may include the customer coming at me for compensating them for their financial losses for what they've lost, lawsuit or negotiation to work out between us what went wrong, how I can make it right. It's not like I'm doing a favor for somebody. So they have every right to expect what they're paying me to do, in this case, backups or UPSs, to, you know, not burn their building down, and also enable their employees to save whatever work they were working on, so they're not paying the employees all over again to do the same work once the power comes back on. As a home user, you can be far more lax. You can trust whatever you want to trust. I mean, it doesn't inconvenience anybody outside of your room. You know what I'm saying? Like outside of your house, nobody cares. So you have to understand, coming from a real technician, an IT technician in the industry, the advice I give you is solid, sound advice that makes perfect sense for everybody, whether you're in a business or not. Whether or not you can be bothered, that's really nothing I can help you with. But all I can do is provide you the information, and what you do with it is entirely up to you. It has no impact on my life. If your battery's dead for the last 5 years and you believe your software tells you it's good and you can't be bothered to unplug it and check it, and then you lose a bunch of work or something happens, there's no negative consequence for me. It makes no difference to me. So, you know, to each their own. Planet Cryos with a $10 super chat says, with Acronis, you can set up your email for each individual backup and get notified that it was completed. Plus, I would validate it every time, and that's peace of mind for me. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I would still, from time to time, look at the size of the backups, right? Because the Acronis backups are going to be pretty large. So I would regularly just inspect the size, because if I see a backup that's really super tiny, I'm going to be concerned. Also, I've seen people that don't have Acronis configured correctly, where they just keep adding backup after backup until they run out of hard drive space. So I would audit that as well to make sure that we're not consuming too much server space of an Acronis backup, that we're not saving too many of them, and that older ones are being automatically removed, as they should be, before it becomes a problem and I get the support call. So for me, it's a lot of preventive maintenance. It's a lot about checking just a few things now, stress-free on my own schedule, versus getting a phone call unexpectedly that's interrupting whatever I'm doing, because trust me, I'm always doing something. I'm never just staring at the phone hoping a customer is going to call with a problem. I'm busy. When that phone rings, every single time, it's interrupting me. And if that interruption is determined to be far more important than what I'm doing right now, then I'm expected to drop what I'm doing and go take care of that. That's not what I had scheduled for the day, not what I had planned, and not what I was prepared for. I want to avoid that as much as possible because it interferes with the productivity of my clients. And if they've got numerous employees, that productivity is lost at multiples of how many employees they have. It postpones whatever I was working on, causing a delay to whatever ETA I had for that customer. And it's stressful. It's stressful for me. It's stressful for the customer. And there's this uneasiness directly afterwards is, did he fix it right? Is it going to stay up now? There's a little bit of trauma involved with it before people feel comfortable again. So being proactive and using preventive measures for me and my business has resulted in greater than 90% of fewer unexpected calls from my customers. It's pretty rare these days that a customer will call me with a problem that is something I could have prevented. So yes, we still have power supplies that fail whenever they fail or RAM modules go out, but a lot of things are absolutely preventable, and we can often identify a drive that's failing and we can get that replaced before it completely fails. We can identify a computer that's running slowly and try to figure out why before it becomes a support call. And I'm able to do that on my schedule, typically after hours. Many times I'm able to access the computers remotely, and I'm able to do those system optimizations and cleanups. And the customers are at home sleeping. They don't even know. They go into work the next day, they go into work and everything just works. And they notice, hey, the slowness isn't there anymore. I wonder if Carrie fixed it or if it fixed itself. Who knows? They get just very rarely do customers follow up with that unless they called to complain to begin with. Now, if customer calls to complain, I always have to follow up with the customer, especially if I'm working after hours. I will send them an email and let them know what I did that evening and the status of things. Martin Wolferts says, Synology NASs can email the result of a scheduled task with log if required. I check every morning if all my NASs have checked in as peace of mind. Yeah, absolutely. And that's an audit. If you're looking at those emails, then you are doing an audit. If you're not looking at the emails, then you're not auditing. So an audit doesn't necessarily mean you have to go in and manually do things, as far as a backup goes. But yes, that is a form of audit by looking at those logs and making sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to look. Lawn Dog wants to know what type of backups I typically use for my businesses, incremental or differential. Well, so different businesses have different budgets, different amounts of data that need to be backed up. So for the two of my bigger clients, we use a Synology NAS. We've gotten rid of their servers in both cases because they didn't need them and replaced it with a Synology NAS. Now, initially they were 4-drive NASs. One customer we moved to a rack-mounted NAS because they put all this money in, and I disagreed with it, but they put all this money into upgrading their network with overkill, with Ubiquiti equipment and 10 gigabit networking cables. It's a nightmare. Anyway, for them, what I do is I keep a 2.5-inch solid state drive plugged into the USB port of one of the computers. And it's the main employee, not the owner of the company, but sort of the person that runs the office. And I just tell her this is labeled as backup number 1. I've got 3 of them. So there's backup number 1, backup number 2, and backup number 3. And using a piece of software to synchronize the files, I synchronize everything on the Synology NAS to the attached solid state drive. Now, backups only get bigger. The number of files we back up today is way more than the number of files we backed up 10 years ago. Data sets only get larger. Initially, I was using 2.5-inch mechanical laptop drives, like the Seagate Elements or Western Digital Passport, but the backups are taking too long. So now we've got a USB Type-C, Samsung T7 Shield, and we back up using, what's the name of the software I'm using now? Synchronicity? Used to be called Super Flexible File Synchronizer. And I've been using that since the early 2000s. And I put it into exact mirror mode, where we say, take everything on the left, you have to visualize the left being the NAS, and duplicate it to the right, with the right being the external USB drive. And if a file's been deleted on the left, delete the file on the right. If a file's been changed on the left, change that file on the right. If a directory's been added on the left, add that directory on the right. If any subdirectories of any directories on the left have been added, it's an exact mirror mode. This is very, very important. We never, ever make changes as far as the backup goes. We never make changes to the NAS. The employees do that when they save files. I don't do that. The changes only get made in one direction, on the right. So the left is what I've determined, and you can configure it any way you want. But for me, I always make the left my source, and the right is the exact mirror mode function. And all I'm doing is file synchronization. It matches exactly file for file. About once a week or once a month, depending on the customer and what they're paying for, I go to the office after hours and I collect that drive and I replace it with another one, the exact same make and model, just to keep life simple. And they're labeled backup number 1, backup number 2, and backup number 3. And of course, I make sure I do a synchronization before I take it, and I do a synchronization before I leave. The employees never even realize I was there. The device is still the same looking device that's always connected. And that way, if they need a file they've accidentally deleted, I'm able to retrieve that for them immediately with that local backup. But at the same time, if there's a fire, if there's a theft, if there's a flood, if some employee decides to, they're ticked off at their employer and they want to delete everything off of the NAS, I have an offsite backup that's not plugged into the network. If there's a ransomware virus, anything, we can recover. And in a worst case scenario, the amount of data they lose is since the last time I took the backup off site. So if I'm only picking the backup up once a month because that's cheaper, then it depends. The clients, when I talk to my clients, I explain to them the pros and the cons, the cost, and the potential loss based on how much you want to spend. The less you spend, the more you're gambling for more loss. Some businesses are very unique, like a tax business, where there's just a crazy amount of data that's being added between January and April. So I had one client that was a CPA, and we would do backups once a month, but from right around February 15th or so until April 15th, they wanted backups to be done nightly because employees were working, 16-hour days the closer you get to the tax filing deadline, which back then was April 15th. And if they lost one day's worth of data, that was going to be devastating for them. So for just a couple months out of the year, we did the backups nightly. And then they would have me take the backup and pick it up, I think, weekly during those two or 3 months. But then the rest of the year, it was far more relaxed. I've got another business that had very little data when they first started out. They think they had 30,000 files. Last I dealt with that customer, they were closing in on 1 million files. So the longer the company stays in business, the more data they accrue. And now the length of time it takes to back the data up and the potential for the amount of loss you can have, is the entire history of the company. Now, me and that customer have since gone different ways, and what they do for backup now, I don't know and I don't care. But it was rapidly gaining momentum. The size of the backups were just, multiplying, I would say, certainly annually, the rate at which they were growing, the amount of data they were storing. I was worried. I was worried that we were soon going to run out of server space. I was worried the amount of time it's taking. I'm not billing them for accurately, the amount of time it takes to do a full new backup. And, there were times where I had to schedule that for like a Friday evening, so I had enough time on a new backup drive to basically copy everything off of the NAS. And then I can synchronize it from that point forward. And that would happen for a number of reasons. I would replace the backup drives once they were about 3 years old. Whether they needed it or not, they got new backup drives. Never had a backup drive fail on me. And then those backup drives get securely erased, and then typically give them away or sell them super cheap to somebody. Now we're doing solid state drives. And the capacity of the drives is growing. So back when I first started doing it, the drives were like 320 gigs for one of these little external drives. Now, of course, a 5 terabyte drive is not uncommon on a mechanical drive, a 2.5 inch. So instead now, we're able to get these 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte Samsung T7, that's my preference, plug it into a USB Type-C port, and my backups are much faster, especially for the clients that have a lot of stuff to back up. So, yeah, it just depends on the customer, though. I don't back up their individual workstations. They're all configured the same. So if a workstation were to go down, the employee simply needs to sit at a different desk for the rest of the day. They can call me in, I'll pick up the computer, diagnose it here. If it's a drive that fails, I'll simply put a new drive in, reinstall the operating system, put all the updates and drivers back on it, reconfigure it for the network, put Microsoft Office back on it, re-deliver it, and then they can, configure their bookmarks and things the way they want. This is cheaper, far cheaper than doing images of all their workstations. There should be nothing on those workstations that's important. Everything should be saved onto the server for that reason, or what we call the server, which is in most cases a NAS. I'm trying to think if I have any clients right now that still have servers. Certainly nobody that calls me regularly. But that's the logic behind it. Now, for home users and people that are running a business out of their home, a lot of these folks tend to take care of these things themselves. They don't necessarily hire somebody like me to maintain it for them. They're more hands-on. And typically I hear from these folks when what they did didn't work. So in other words, I'll get the call when they thought they were making a backup. Turns out the backup's not working. Somehow they've dropped the ball. And there's not much I can do for them in that case, right? I can refer them to a place like $300 data recovery if that's, potentially going to help them. But it's pretty uncommon for me to have a home user where I do regular monthly maintenance for. I've had a handful of them in my career. I've had a couple of real estate agents that had small offices in their home and absolutely insisted on paying me to do regular maintenance, backups, updates, all that stuff. And one client in particular got really, really ill, and I haven't heard from them since, so I don't even know if they're still around. But when they got really, really sick, the importance of their business, it wasn't that important anymore, needless to say. And so everything for them scaled down. And when it scaled down, their income scaled down. So not only could they not afford me anymore, they didn't necessarily need me anymore. They had bigger fish to fry at that point. So yeah, that's primarily the way I'm backing up machines. We're not using differential or incremental type backups because that would essentially put the data in some sort of proprietary container. And the problem with that is you'll need that software, that proprietary software, to open that container and extract that data back. I don't have that problem with file synchronization. Now, if you're dealing with something that's highly secure and you want to be able to put all the data in a container and lock it with a password and encryption, well, of course, that's a different story entirely, but none of my clients require that or have requested it. Captain Blinsky contributes $5 via Super Chat. Says, good afternoon, Kerry and all from Southwest Pennsylvania. Welcome in, Captain Blinsky. Thank you for your contribution and your support here on the channel. I'm going to scroll through the chat, see if I've missed anything. If you've asked a question or made a comment that you wanted me to see and I haven't addressed it, it's likely because I haven't seen it. So you can repost that again. And now that I'm looking and paying attention, I'll hopefully see it this time. So yes, if you've asked a question I haven't answered, it's because I haven't seen it. So just post your question again. Joseph Winterhalter pops in and says hello, as does Robert McCord-McGumey saying hello. Ron Barnish says hello. John Rogers saying hello. Welcome in, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Walter Brady says, hello all. I received the offer from Acronis for 3 months at $50, and I'm going to take advantage of it soon. Doesn't that offer end in, is it the end of February, the end of this month? It's a really good deal. If you don't want the antivirus part, you don't want the cloud storage part of Acronis, it's an invite-only thing that they were offering 3 years for $49.95 or something, $49.99, where you're basically still subscribing and getting all the updates that come out for the next 3 years to keep your Acronis up to date. That's a good deal. I think anybody who has the link can use it. So if you want to share the link with the chat room for people that want to take advantage of it, I've asked Acronis if we could promote that offer here, and they said it's invite only. But at the same time, when you click on the link, it doesn't ask you for verification of who you are. So I think if you have the link, you can use it. The only difference is I don't receive any commission or credit for that. But, I'm looking out for you guys first and foremost. Roy Starman says, I just purchased the B-Link microcomputer you reviewed a few months ago. It solves my Windows 11 compatibility issue for my astronomy telescope. Well, you'll have to let me know what you think of it after you've had it a while and what it's like to live with and how reliable it turns out to be for you. I hopefully will have another machine from B-Link coming here soon to review. Of course, we still have the sale going on for the Camrui PC at $229. And that's good until tomorrow night. So you have between now and tomorrow night to pick that $299 Windows 11 Pro mini PC up. It's got 500 gigs of storage, 16 gigs of RAM, an N95 12th generation CPU for $70 off. That's a pretty big discount off of what's only a $299 computer. You can pick it up at $229. There's a $40, I think, coupon code at Amazon, coupon checkbox at Amazon. And then when you go to the checkout, you enter carry only as your promo code. It takes like another 10% off. I think it's 10%. At $229, look how much just buying Windows 11 Pro will set you back. Look how much buying a 500 gig SSD costs. Look how much 16 gigs of laptop memory, just a single 16 gig module. Look how much, and add all that up. Never mind the motherboard, the cooler, the case, the power supply. You couldn't build it for this price. So just so you know, as a friendly reminder, that deal ends tomorrow, February 15th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. I strongly encourage you guys, if you're on the fence about it, it's a really, really good deal. And that's a computer that's got Windows 11 on it, and it's a 12th gen processor. And it's Windows 11 Pro, so you're not required to create that whole Microsoft account or do that workaround thing, which is always welcome in my book. Transmitter Guy says, what program do I recommend people use for backing up? I don't. Essentially, you should just use something to back up. At the end of the day, it's got to be something that makes sense to you. It's got to be something you will use. Personally, I like Acronis for most users. It's very simple. It's easy to do a whole image of a hard drive and not worry about where's my data. I can't answer that question for people. Where's my data? I don't know where your data is. Where are my socks? What drawer did I put my socks in? How would you know? So for people that ask me this question, how do I back up? It's a loaded question. At the end of when it's all said and done, I'm going to try and find another expression besides at the end of the day. At the end of the day, what matters is it's something that makes sense to you that you're going to use, whatever that is. You could copy your files onto a flash drive by hand if you want to. Ideally, you'll have multiple flash drives, multiple backups, not just one. And ideally, you have one of your backups in another location. Because if anything happens where the backup is being stored, fires, thefts, floods, whatever it is, it's always unexpected. The earthquake in Turkey, nobody saw that coming. So any backups that were stored in any of those buildings, likely destroyed. The amount of data that was lost during 9/11, nobody talks about this. Massive amounts of data were potentially destroyed when that unexpected event occurred. So backups are an insurance for the unexpected. Anybody who has ever lost data, the one thing they have in common is that they weren't expecting it. So nobody expects a fire to burn down their building, but it happens. And nobody expects to be robbed, but it happens. Sometimes drives just fail. Sometimes people get a virus infection. Sometimes there's file corruption that occurs for whatever reason. And if your backup is always connected to your computer, it's not really a backup because whatever happens to the computer at the same time is likely going to happen to the backup. So if you get ransomware, it's going to infect everything connected to the computer. That's why it's important that when you make a backup, you disconnect it and put it away. And on top of that, have more than one backup. So, and in more than one location. And how often you do that is really up to you to decide. You just ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? No, that's the wrong question. You ask yourself, if I had to restore from my backup today, would I be upset that I'm missing stuff I've created since then? And if you're answering that question as yes, then it's time for you to make another backup. But this is not a universal answer. So depending on how often you create things and how important those things are you're creating, one of my customers was writing a book, made his backup in April, bought the backup drive, followed my advice, and then never used it again. So 9 months later in December, mistakenly clicks on something he shouldn't have. It's the holidays, he's not thinking straight, he's in a hurry, gets his computer infected with ransomware, wants to know how I can fix it. I said, the cheapest, fastest way to fix it is to pay the $500 ransom. He said, well, I don't have $500. Well, I mean, this guy had a house 3 times bigger than mine. His property tax alone was probably as much as my whole house. Big grand piano in the living room. His next door neighbor, the CEO of Intel, that's the level of neighborhood. So for him to tell me he didn't have $500, I'm not buying it. I said, well, I'll tell you what. I can pick up your computer, we can format it, reinstall Windows, reinstall the drivers, and then just give me your backup drive and I'll restore your files for you. And he says, well, the thing about that is I did buy the backup drive that you recommended, and I did use it, but I've never used it again. And I've been writing a book. And so the last 9 months of the chapters I've been writing are now encrypted with the ransomware. I mean, I don't know what he's expecting me to say. There's nothing more I can do. Pay the ransom. You know, just for me to come out and do that work, you're probably looking at half the ransom right there. Just pay the ransom. So anyway, he decides to go talk to his neighbor, who was the CEO at Intel, retired. And he advises a company that he uses that came out and said, you know, if we can't remove a virus, there's no charge. He follows up with me and says that company did come out, spent 5 or 6 hours at his place, unable to do anything, and Didn't charge him anything. And I said, a company came on site to your home, worked on your computer for hours, and then didn't charge you 1 penny for it because they weren't able to make any progress? He goes, yeah. I said, well, that sounds like a tough business model to sustain. I wonder how long they're going to stay in business, because that's a real easy way to go out of business. The cost of traveling to the customer's location, the loss of work while you're being consumed and monopolized by that one particular problem. Sounds like a very inexperienced person, because just from the phone call alone, I could tell him that's not something you're going to be able to remove. I already told him as much. So that sounded like somebody with far less experience, and he was entrusting his important data because the price was right? They were only going to charge him if they were successful. They should have known better than to even try. At the end of the day, that wasted his time and it wasted their time, and it just prolonged the inevitable. They only had 72 hours to pay the $500. After that, the deal's off the table. And so he ended up wiping the computer himself, reinstalling it himself, and figures he'll just rewrite those chapters again. Okay. Now, I've never heard from the guy since, and I'm totally okay with it. If those are the kind of calls I'm going to get, he knows that this is his doing. He knew about backups. He bought the drive. He knew how to make the backups and procrastinated that for 9 months, perpetually, inevitably. He was never going to make another. I don't know what it was going to take for him to update his backup. That's not my problem. He's not a maintenance customer. He's not somebody I maintain. And for somebody to have that kind of wealth and tell me they're broke, those aren't the customers I need. I'd much prefer a customer who understands the value of the service that I offer and doesn't even make the attempt to suggest that they're, in a financial hardship place when I'm looking at this big, beautiful house. They sell the grand piano if times are so tough. That'll get you 10 or 20 extra grand right there. So I'm not getting the whole picture. When I encounter people like that, as long as I'm getting paid, I don't care what their attitude about money is. But when somebody's clearly got a boatload of money and at the same time they're trying to convince me they're broke while I'm in their big luxurious mansion, what I charge doesn't change. What I can do for the customer doesn't change. The customer didn't make his backups. The customer clicked on something he shouldn't have clicked on. The customer failed at multiple stops. And the customer did these things because they've convinced themselves they don't have the money, when in fact it's pretty obvious to me they do. And they want to control everything themselves, which they did, and had this result. Until that happened, they were absolutely certain they didn't need, that everything they were doing was right. They were absolutely, positively, 100% will argue to your face that they don't need anybody to tell them how to do backups or to warn them about viruses. They already know all this stuff. They handle it themselves. Thank you, I'm not interested. And probably had that attitude for many years until that happened. And now, I don't know what they're doing, but I can guarantee they're a bit more humbled, and I bet you they're a lot more cautious. But it's a little frustrating because many people have to learn this on their own. And the cost varies depending on the person. I've had customers that have lost pictures of loved ones who aren't with us anymore. Might be the last pictures they had, their most recent pictures before that person perished. They're gone forever. And they're on the phone and they're distraught, they're crying. It puts me in a very awkward place because there's nothing I can do. It's just, I'm sorry that it happened. But telling me after the fact, there isn't much I can do to help you. If you had said, if you had thought to yourself, boy, if anything happens to my computer and these are the only copies of these most recent photos of somebody I care about that's no longer here, what am I going to do? I better call Carrie and ask for advice. I would have given the advice freely. But after something occurs and then calling, where there's damage. Not all damage is repairable. And some damage is repairable at a very high expense, which a lot of people couldn't afford if they wanted to. So the cheapest, most guaranteed way to give yourself some peace of mind and assurance is to make copies of important things on your computer. Whether you put those copies out in the cloud, whether you put those copies onto a local drive, ideally you'll have more than just one copy. I use the word copies. One backup isn't enough. I use a minimum of 3 backups for all my clients, and we rotate them regularly. And once the backup drives reach about 3 years old, the backup drives are replaced. They're used regularly. IT support dude contributes $2 via Super Chat and says, here's a little something for the legend himself. Well, I don't know who that is, but I appreciate the contribution. Thank you. Greenia says, I don't know if this will work or not. Here's a link to the Acronis offer. You click on that and see if it works for me. I don't think that worked for me. Yeah, that for me anyway, that link didn't work, unfortunately. That just took me to just the regular Acronis page, unfortunately. And of course, people just keep gathering more and more data. These latest cell phones that are coming out, the Samsung S23 Ultra has a 200 megapixel camera. The size of the images is larger. The number of images people are taking, far more than ever before in the history of mankind. So when you start uploading your data to the cloud, there's typically like a certain amount that's free. All the folks that offer the free cloud storage know it's just a matter of time before you're going to exceed that storage capacity, and you're going to have to decide to delete some stuff or to pay extra for more storage. And if you decide to pay extra for more storage, they know it's only a matter of time before you'll need to pay extra for more storage. And that's ramping up and building momentum. The amount of space that you're consuming in 6 months of data creation, whether it's photos or whatever data you're creating, you are likely to create the same amount of data in the next 3 months, and then in the next 1 month, and then it's going to be even more. And it's just a combination of hoarding, or that these things have value to you and you don't want to give them up. And at the same time, when you're making your backup, you'll notice it starts to get expensive when you're backing up hundreds of thousands of files, which it will eventually grow to. If it's not there yet, it will. And the question is, how important is it? So now you can be willing, if you're willing to sacrifice, okay, these pictures are nice, but I don't absolutely have to have them. But these pictures, these are once in a lifetime photos I never want to lose. And you can make that sacrifice, but you will sooner or later run out of the free space. And again, when it comes to a backup drive, you will eventually fill it. So one way or another, if you plan on keeping data, it's going to cost you. And it's no different than people that rent out a storage unit. They have too much stuff in their house. So we're going to stick it in storage, and then you've got to pay monthly for that storage. And I've seen people put stuff in storage and pay the monthly fee for that and keep it in there for years. And most of that stuff, if it's furniture, it's completely ruined after being in storage for that length of time. And a lot of times out of fashion. It's just, a piece of furniture that doesn't fit into the decor anymore. So if something's going to be in storage for a long time, I just recommend just sell it. And when it's time, go buy yourself something new that'll be modern, fit with modern decor in won't be all dusty and musty from being stuck in a storage shed that you've probably paid more for, maybe 3 times more for than the stuff that's worth that's in the storage shed. And the same can be true for data. I've seen people that want to save everything all the time. And if you don't have much, it's not a big deal, but sooner or later, most people, their data just accrues and just gets massively bigger every year. It grows and grows and grows and gains momentum. And the amount it grows. So then it becomes sort of this sacrifice. Do I pay the money to back all this up? Or am I willing to risk losing some of it and just back up the stuff that's important? And that's for each person to decide individually. Businesses don't really have that convenience. With a business, if the business loses their data, they're probably going to lose the business. There's not very many businesses that can survive a complete data loss. Also, if the data is not secured, if somehow the business is hacked and their customers' data gets into the hands of bad guys, very few companies can survive that bad press and those pissed off customers that trusted you with their data. So all of this costs money. Some companies have famously, take a company like Sony a few years back, said they weren't going to spend $300,000. They weren't going to spend $1 million to upgrade their security for $300,000 worth of stuff. And then they got hacked. And personal emails between the executives were exposed. They were talking smack about some of the celebrities that they pay to be in their movies. And the level of embarrassment Sony suffered from this was far more than $300,000 worth. And you can believe the amount of losses they had from the movies that were stolen and leaked online was far greater than $1 million that it would have cost them to secure it. So as a result, it cost them far more than $1 million to do what needed to be done, what was advised to be done. And they learned the hard way that what they estimated to be worth $300,000 was worth closer to about $300 million. And that by comparison, the $1 million to secure it, in hindsight, was a bargain. Because when they had to secure it after the fact, the expense was greater because they had to fix what was broken and then implement new security and new hardware and suffer all the financial losses and the public embarrassment. And so when you have a company as big as Sony and the executives that are running it are making these decisions, it just goes to show you that this is a human problem. This problem doesn't go away because a company is of a certain size. If the folks in charge are not making the right decisions with their IT, most companies won't survive like Sony did. Sony luckily has many other divisions, but I've seen my share of companies come and go from just not following best practices. That was completely avoidable. And for minimal expense, honestly, for considering what they lost. But it's a little too late once it happens. Once the cat's out of the bag, there's no putting it back in again. So it's one of those things, it's a life-changing event that, like many life-changing events, happens without warning and in a split second that you never saw coming. And while we can't guarantee to prevent that from happening, we can at least be prepared if it does, so our business stays in business and our employees still have jobs. And for companies that don't want to do that, I don't want to work with them. Absolutely not. Because that's reflective of me. I am very proud to say that I have never had a company that I work for ever lose data, ever. No company that has hired me to be their managed service provider has ever had 1 hour or more of downtime, unless it was something beyond my control, such as their internet service provider went out, or their power went out, a big storm rolled in, an electrical spike hit. That stuff, we can't control whether or not that happens. But if it happens, I can get them back up and running nearly immediately. So what's that worth And that's for each business owner to decide. And for every home user to decide what your data's worth. The difference between you and a business is a business typically has employees, and those employees rely on that salary to feed and house their families. The consequences can be extraordinarily dire. So this line of work that I'm in it can be very stressful, and there's a lot of responsibility on it, but it's also very rewarding. And nothing makes me feel better than when a client calls and says, I'm in a panic, I've deleted this whole directory, I don't know what I was thinking, what do I do? Like this happened the other day. Customer called me on a Saturday working at the office and deleted the file that they were working on. And I was able to log in remotely. I have a recycle bin that's active on the NAS, on the Synology NAS, but only administrators have access to it. I'm the only administrator. And I was able to retrieve that file from the recycle bin while I was on the phone with the customer. This took under 5 minutes from the time of the call that started to the time the call ended. I asked the customer, is this the file? They said, yes, that's the file. I said, open it. And the customer said, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is right up to the very last word I just typed. It's everything. How did you do that? I go, well, you did the right thing by calling me right away. The longer you wait for any sort of data recovery or repair, typically the longer that repair or recovery is going to take, and the odds of success go down the longer you wait. So I said, you did the right thing by calling me immediately. Not a big deal. And there's just this huge sigh of relief. Oh, you've saved my day. And what's wonderful is, of course, the boss has no idea this ever happened. As far as the boss knows, that employee came in on the weekend, did their job. They don't know there was this potential huge emergency that took place. And because everything was already in line and prepared for that unexpected event, there was a contingency and a process that I have implemented and ready to roll in a second's notice. And I'm very proud of that. So yes, well, there's a lot of stress. There can be anxiety and pressure in the type of work that I do. It's also extremely rewarding when I'm able to deliver when these unexpected events take place. And there's no telling. I have customers that can go for years with no unexpected events. Not typical, but it can happen. But it's just a matter of time. The unexpected event will occur to all of us at some point. It happens to some of us more than others. And with companies that hire employees, it could be the judgment of the employee is off that day, they weren't paying attention, they clicked the wrong thing, and it affects the entire office. So you can imagine, if you're a business owner, that your whole business can be wiped out if you're not using and practicing safe IT practices for security and backups, but you've got multiple employees who at any moment can make an innocent mistake and put you completely out of business or cost you tens of thousands of dollars in IT work. So it's very difficult sometimes to convince people what they're paying me for. And all it takes is for one of those events to happen while I'm working for them. For them to call me and say, well, the event happened, but you're not my regular IT person. I got your name from a friend or whatever, or you used to work on my stuff years ago, but you haven't worked on it since. Now we have a problem. Can you rescue us now? In most cases, if it's data loss, it's gone. There's nothing I can do. It's like trying to call and get insurance after you got into a car accident. You could say, I've been driving my whole life. I've never been into a car accident. Why would I need insurance? And it may be no fault of your own. Maybe somebody just runs right into you. Maybe you did everything right. You were in the right. You had the right of way, and yet your car is completely totaled and uninsured, and the driver drove off. What are you going to do? So it doesn't matter to me what you do, but I can tell you that you'll certainly wish you had insurance at that point if you didn't. So if that's, if you can foresee a bad thing happening, whether it's a loss of data, a hard drive crash, a virus, and you think to yourself, what would I do if suddenly my drive wasn't bootable anymore? My drive just died or got infected. What would I do? Would I be upset, or do I have a plan? That's a question each of us need to ask ourselves, and each of us need to answer in our own way, what's ever acceptable for you, and understand what risk you're accepting, what expense you're going to endure, one way or the other. You want to keep rolling the dice? Have at it. Maybe you'll get lucky and die first before you suffer data loss. That's a weird way to look at luck. Let me grab a Gatorade. Again, if you have any questions for me, guys, fire away there in the chat. I'll do my best to provide an answer or a direction to where you can find an answer. Anything tech related, I'll be happy to do my best to answer. And of course, we have very knowledgeable people in our community, so always watch the chat for suggestions and answers to your questions as well. Many of them are far more polished in some areas of tech than I am, and it's good to get all your options. Bike Man says, when I was younger back in 2005, I learned the importance of backups back then. I was an idiot and tested Windows Live OneCare, which was Microsoft's first venture in antivirus, and infected my system. That's one way to test it. Patrick wants to know if I ever got a protection sleeve for the portable monitor. I did. I did not buy the one from the manufacturer of the monitor, InnoView. And the one I ordered was cheaper. What I don't like about it, well, the InnoView monitor didn't have a separate little bag to hold the cables and whatnot. And the InnoView folder was, it didn't have a flap on it. It was just like an open folder. So if you tilted it, the monitor could slide out onto the ground. So I got this one. This is made by a company called Homie, H-O-M-I-E-E. It fits up to a 50. The monitor's a 15.6-inch monitor. I think this is a 16-inch folder for it. I was hopeful that this would attach, this little baggie, because it advertised it has magnets that close, to keep the lid closed. And as you can see, there's little magnets here and here. And I thought there would be magnets on here to attach this little baggie, or a clip or something, Velcro, anything. So that's the only downside. But it was only like $16. And yeah, I absolutely wanted to be able to have a flap to close it so the monitor wouldn't slide out. The magnets in the flap don't matter. But I also needed a little satchel to hold the accompanying cables. So the only downside is that the satchel does not attach to this. But I like the material. It's got a couple extra pockets here in the back. And yeah, I'm real happy with it for like 16 bucks. It's made well, it feels good. The monitor sits in there and it's not going to scratch the monitor up. But yeah, thanks for the question. And Patrick's sent a link to Amazon for what appears to be some kind of a tough case. That's much bigger than anything I wanted. It's too thick. It's also nearly twice the price, but does have a nice carrying handle on it. I suppose if I was going to travel a lot with mine, you know, especially air travel, having a case like that would be more important to me. Michael says, I had a tech come out from my ISP, his internet service provider, and told me if I use my own router to not put the modem or router into bridge mode because It's for static IP and I use DHCP. Is that accurate? Yes. Yeah, you definitely, your ISP typically is only going to give you one IP address. You want that one IP address to go to a router, and then the router can distribute up to 255 IP addresses of connected devices. Your ISP isn't. You're just going to get the one. So you would not want to be in a bridge mode. You'd want to be just the way the router comes out of the box. If you bought a brand new router, just the way it comes out of the box. You would have to manually configure it to shoot yourself in the foot like that. If you just left it alone and just plugged it in and went through the setup, it'll configure itself and it'll automatically enable DHCP by default. So sort of a no news thing there. You know, take it out of the box, plug it in, follow the on-screen setup, you're done. If you go in and try and outsmart it, you'll likely shoot yourself in the foot. So yeah, you don't want to put it into bridge mode. Michael continues, that's funny because their tech support put the old one in bridge mode and it was cutting out. I love my ASUS router, but the modem was cutting out. Well, you could have a bad modem, and you know that's on your ISP to resolve. You're paying your ISP monthly for service, and these modems do, you know, like everything else, they get older, they start to fail. So if that's the case, if your modem was, as you described, cutting out, then that's on your ISP to resolve that. That's not on you with regards to your own router. That's your modem, and it's your ISP's responsibility to do whatever needs to be done, whether it's repair or replacement of the modem so that you can get the service you're paying for. Once it's out of the modem and into your router, that's a different story. If the router's cutting out, that's not on them, that's on you. Unless, of course, you rent the router from them, then it'll be back on them again. Who's ever got your money, basically. Any other questions for me? Happy to address any technical related questions you guys have. Anything more you want to know or concerned about with regards to these remote rebooters? When they're ideal, when they're not ideal? Battery backup, data backup. All of this equipment exists in order to prevent or minimize downtime. If you're somebody that doesn't care about downtime, obviously this video isn't going to be of much interest to you. But as you can imagine, people that use their computer for earning a living and businesses that have employees that are on the clock getting paid by the employer to work need the systems up for their employees to do their job. If the employees cannot do their job, their customers can't be helped. And if your customers aren't being helped, your customers might take their business somewhere else. So you can imagine, depending on the perspective of the computer owner, just how critical and important this can be to a certain portion of the population and how disinterested another portion of the population is that doesn't have anything riding, like, you know, to potentially lose. And that's why I say there's no right or wrong answer here, just a level of understanding what level of risk you are taking and at what price or what potential price if things go badly. So that way you can't say, I didn't know. Now you know. And now you can set your expectations accordingly. And that should avoid any surprises. That's my goal here. I just want you to make informed decisions that are right for you. It's not for me to tell you what the right decision is, but to give you the information so that you can more accurately make an informed decision that suits your particular lifestyle or suits your priorities, for lack of a better word. Chat room looks pretty quiet in there, so maybe it's time to wrap things up. Thank you again out to IT Support Dude, Captain Blinsky, Planet Cryos, Carmela Lopez, has extended their membership now for 2 months. Carmelo said hello. Sorry I missed that earlier. Thank you, Carmelo, for being a member of the channel. Thanks to you guys for your contributions and your kindness, your support. Thanks for hanging out with me and interacting with me. And I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up today's video. Thank you guys so much for joining. And again, for those who participated, for folks who are watching the replay of the chat, I hope if you've not before, I hope in the future you'll join us during a live video and pop into the chat and say hello. It's a very friendly community. James Prezi contributes $5 in Super Chat. He says, it's not every day that an IT tech invites us into their home to talk computers for hours. Thanks for all you do. Well, thank you, James. I appreciate that you get what I'm doing. The reason I do it is because people don't do it. If this was a regular thing that, you know, there were all kinds of YouTube channels with people who work in the industry sharing their experience with people, I wouldn't feel the need to do this. I'd be doing something else. But a lot of people don't get it. A lot of people are absolutely brainwashed into watching commercials. Your videos are too long. I want to see a faster video. That's called a commercial, and the television's filled with them. But in any event, you know, everybody's got their preference, and I appreciate that you get what I'm doing here and understand the reason why I do it is because it's so rare to see this type of content on YouTube from any professional in an industry. That's why I like the gentleman who does the Septic systems that I mentioned earlier, James, what did I say his name? James Butler. You know, he's a professional in his field. And you don't run into too many professionals in any field. The most I find are in automotive. I see a lot of professional mechanics making videos showing how to repair cars. But in any other field, it's pretty rare. So I'm glad that you get it, because not everybody does. So thank you for that, and thank you for your contribution. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for me for today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all again very, very soon. A shout out to our friend Jack Wilson. Hopefully he'll get his whole septic system there under control soon. And again, thanks to him for his generous contribution prior to today's broadcast. Those contributions are used where I buy equipment and materials that I use for demonstration here. I did not buy any of these remote rebooters because I figured it'd be a waste of money for me to do so. I felt like I could explain everything without having to demonstrate it for you guys to understand what it does. And, you know, to do that, it would have set me back. If I bought every one of those to show you the differences, there's $400 in remote rebooters there. And I don't have use for any of them. So in many cases, it helps me to have something in front of me to demonstrate it, to have it better understandable, to put it into action. But in this case, and this doesn't happen very often, I'm able to just simply show you the links. All those links, by the way, are in the video description below this video, along with the reviews of those products, so you can read the opinions of people who have bought those and what they thought of them. So if you're considering buying one and you want to learn more, you can also search YouTube for this specific make and model. Somebody out there probably has an overview or review of those units. And yeah, if you end up buying one or using one, let me know what you think of it and whether or not it was a good purchase for you. I love to hear back from folks who are the real end users and what their experience is versus the professional. And especially when it comes to the vast majority of the big tech channels that are just making commercials. They're being paid by corporations to advertise their products. And it's disguised as like a user content enthusiast content creation, when in fact, it's nothing more than a scripted, paid, 30-minute long infomercial. And there's nothing wrong with it, so long as you're aware of the difference. That's all I'm saying. Understand the source of the content. With the content that I am providing coming out of my pocket, using contributions from supporting members, it enables me to be truly independent and to actually review things I genuinely want to review. So again, thanks for watching. I'll see you all very, very soon. And until next time, bye for now.